amanfo no mu bi eka se operation recover all loot aba na wiye ora no ato ensuma NPP fo ni bi agire ma omo kire se ora no eye useless na ora no sa entin konkoda eno bi na PDS scandals no ebi apopi apa sisi ano AttorneyGeneral oba be build ne docket na se enkofo na omoye involved in ora no abusua wakwa prosecute omo asisi ano AttorneyGeneral ope so ye bibi bia na chese o fast track oral prosecution and as a PDS scandal prosecution no eba be breaking no ha e ma say special high court no are ready na eho enso na those who are involved in a PDS scandal no ye de omo case ne fasisi AttorneyGeneral eba be build the docket na chese wama omo akwa face prosecution enye asam ketwa kra abuzua mami akona yenkonkotie ensema ekoso on subscribe na hit on the notification bell so that be any update be a drop no wonsa betumi aka gossip politics TV so medamase.
I think we need to give the investigative agencies the let and the room to be able to do proper investigation, build a proper docket for prosecution. For now, we will not give definite timelines. Because the intelligence agencies are on their own and they do the work by the timelines and by the leads that they get. So what I can assure is that the Attorney General is committed to speedy investigation and trial.
Finance Minister Dr. Mahama Adam to petition the IMF over concerns over these losses. According to the ranking member on the Finance Committee of Parliament, the losses have material implications for the country's macroeconomic stability and fiscal outlook. Dr. Amin, in his letter, is asking the IMF to strengthen its post-ECF program surveillance and ensure full transparency in the BOG's operations. Let's show you a bit more of what we are learning from that letter from the former Finance Minister, Dr. Mohammed Amin Adam. Indeed, he's talked about the central bank remaining deeply in negative equity, with the position worsening significantly in 2025 and government's exposure to recapitalizing the bank growing rapidly. He also talks about how the bank's losses increased despite higher operating income, with rising costs, particularly from open market operations, driving the deterioration. Remember, conversation around sterilization as a way of curbing the impact of open market operations, and the fact that, some members of the Finance Committee thought that there was over-sterilization of the market. He's also talked about a few other matters I want us to see. The true financial impact is more severe when comprehensive losses are considered, with total losses for 2025 surging to nearly 35 billion and about 44 billion when adjusted. We've heard this too a number of times. Remember, the central bank itself posted a loss of 15 plus billion cedis. The minority caucus has consistently said it is much more than that. It's about 44 billion cedis when adjusted. There is also the open market operation costs, which have become extremely high, consuming most of the bank's income, with monetary policy now carrying heavy quasi-fiscal costs. Now, we've been through that already. I will not belabor that point. Finally, he talks about inflation control, which is increasingly coming at the expense of domestic production and jobs, while the bank's reported policy solvency relies heavily on one-off gold gains. Without gold sales, the former finance minister continues, the bank's financial position appears significantly weaker, with gold transactions introducing volatility and raising transparency concerns, even as the bank records both gains and losses from such dealings. Remember that the central bank has said that, look, when the currency got better, we didn't make the projected returns we thought we could make from gold sales because our currency is better. But the finance minister obviously says, look, this one-off gold sales and transaction volatility and raising transparency concerns around our gold transactions, essentially. And then there's also the revaluation reserves have been sharply eroded by exchange rate losses, leaving the bank's balance sheet highly exposed to currency and valuation swings, while the sale of gold reserves has played a major role in supporting income. The IMF, he concludes, should require a clear and transparent recapitalization plan from the central bank outlining the total cost, financing structure, timelines, and path to restoring positive equity. The government must reflect the bank's negative equity in its fiscal framework, treating it as a real obligation in debt and fiscal framework. We'll have a chat on the back of this shortly. In the meantime, we know that the majority in Parliament has called the bluff of the minority, describing their runs over the central bank's 2025 losses as lacking any grip because the central bank made huge losses under the past administration, justifying the losses as the outcome of deliberate policy interventions which have eased inflation, bolstered investor confidence, and stabilized the cedi. Chairman on the Economy and Development Committee says the central bank lost over 80 billion cedis between 2022 and 2024. Now, he also says it is untrue that the BOG is policy insolvent, adding that no central bank works to maximize profits.
And reassurance regarding the 2025 financial results of the Bank of Ghana, BOG, particularly in light of ongoing public discussions about the bank's reported losses and equity position. As the majority side of the Committee on Economy and Development and the entire majority, we consider it necessary in the interest of transparency and informed public discourse to place these results within their proper context, proper economic and policy context. Ladies and gentlemen, at face value, the bank reported a net loss of 15.6 billion Ghana cedis in 2025 fiscal year, and other comprehensive income charge of 19.32 billion, a negative equity position of 96.3 billion. While these figures are significant, necessary, they must not be interpreted through a narrow lens of commercial banking. I repeat, while these figures are significant, they must not be interpreted through the narrow lens of commercial banking. Central banking is fundamentally a public policy function, and its financial outcomes often reflect the cost of stabilizing the economy. To be fully appreciate the 2025 results, one must consider the recent historical context between 2022 to 2024. The Bank of Ghana recorded cumulative losses of approximately 80.85 billion Ghana cedis. That is where I want the press to lay more emphasis on. To fully appreciate the 2025 results, one must consider the recent historical context. Between 2022-2024, the Bank of Ghana recorded cumulative losses of approximately 80.85 billion Ghana cedis in the era of the NPP. For instance, in 2022, the Bank of Ghana incurred a loss of 60.81 billion Ghana cedis, 10.55 billion in 2023, and in 2024, 9.49 billion Ghana cedis. This period coincided with one of the most severe macroeconomic crises in Ghana. Inflation, listen to me now, inflation surged at a peak of 54.13% in 2022, before declining to 23.84% by the end of 2024. The Ghana cedi experienced significant depreciation, reaching approximately 17 cedis to $1 by December 2024, representing a depreciation of about 19.7%. Gross national reserves stood at about $9.3 billion in 2024, covering 4 months of import cover of goods and services. At the same time, the bank's equity position weakened, recording negative 64.34 billion Ghana in 2023, improved slightly to a negative 61 billion in 2024. Given this consideration, my friends, the 2025 financial outcome must be understood as the continuation of a deliberate and necessary policy intervention. I want to lay more emphasis here. Given this consideration, the 2025 financial outcomes must be understood as the continuation of a deliberate and necessary policy intervention. In 2025, the bank's balance sheet reflected a debt position of 96 billion, right? However, macroeconomic indicators show a strong and decisive turnaround. Inflation declined sharply to 5.2%.
We'll stay on this subject. We'll speak to Executive Director at the Institute of Economic and Research for Public Policy, Professor Isaac Boadi. Prof, good afternoon to you and thank you so much for your time. It would appear that the majority-minority, by that the NPP and NDC, are trading accusations over who had the biggest loss while running the central bank. For such an important subject that could impact every life in this country, how does that football of accusation come to you?
Good afternoon to you and to your viewers, your listeners as well, and thanks for having soundbite of what you played. And it had to do with the losses at the central bank in Kenya. Is that right?
Well, Prof, I'll take the question again. I'm saying that it would appear that the government of the past and the government of today are trading accusations over who has caused more loss at the central bank, perhaps at the detriment of dealing with the proper economic issues of this country. For you, where you sit as a policy analyst, a policy researcher, how does that come to you in times like this? Well, it would appear that we have lost Professor Isaac Boadi. Prof, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear.
Right. If you had my question, you go ahead with your response then.
Okay. I had a signboard press conference organized by the minority. Before the press conference, we've had the giving the press conference. This is, I'm sure, quite unfortunate. It's coming as a result of the losses of the BOG. In discussing financial statements, take our political. If we keep having a political lenses or we brush issues under carpet, the minority organized a press conference for the statement. Is right.
The majority held a news conference before the announcement was officially made by the central bank.
Okay, that was the first one that was organized by the majority.
Absolutely.
She also organized one, and we have also had one from minority again.
Indeed.
Let's put all the press conferences aside, and now even focus on the consideration. An entity makes loss and incurs negative equity. Yes, it should be understood this is not the first time a bank has made a loss. It's not the first time. And I've said on other platforms that it is so wrong for a central bank to make a loss. But the point is that we need to interrogate the circumstances under which they incur, and that is fundamental. And I'll give you several examples of situations where such a law should be accepted. In terms of what we have as a country we've had in that situation for some time. They've given an account of how much we lost as a country from 60 billion in 2022, dropped down to 30 to 9, and now it's gone up again. Which entity in the world today or an institution will celebrate a loss? I've not heard this before. Nation will be happy and will make comparisons and say that you lost it. We have done it, it's happened again. So we should clap. I don't think any organization will even encourage it.
The explanation, Prof, we've heard from the central bank is that...
Come again?
I'm saying that the explanation we've heard from the central bank for the losses is they say that recovery cost that much. What do you think about that?
Recovery cost that much. Now, that a central bank used an instrument to mop up excess, and that the cost associated to that stood at 16 billion. Earlier on, almost about beyond 10 billion had been injected instead of dollars. And that created artificial, liquidity in the system. So a policy is now functioning out to mop up the excess.
Right.
And that contributed to 16 billion. Now look at.
Okay, abuzua we ne ensema ekoso ewo political highway so AttorneyGeneral and I see an old take quick action or building a docket send a bay say investigations are a obenya concrete evidence na or they are prosecuting NPP gurus involved in a PDS scandal. But I'm as some Japanese Kokotisa and some way at the MI. Gossip Politics TV so but